Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man Season 1, Episode 5. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, we're picking up immediately where last episode left off. We are getting a better introduction to Otto Octavius, even though he's wearing the suit, but it doesn't seem like he is Doc Ock yet. So once again, so many villains haven't really had their opportunity to become the villains. Even though Doc Ock is kind of villainous right now, he hasn't become that full-blown villain, and it's about him showing up. Because I love his, like, when he's talking to Mila, he's just like, oh yes, I can hook you up with the tech you need to save your friend. Ha ha ha, it seems so friendly. Even though he's a bad guy, because he's selling, like, this weaponry to stuff, and, but yeah, like his true self comes out where it's just like, hey, he looks at himself, not only just to look at himself as better than Tony and Bruce and Norman, but also just like, he'd say, ugh, disinfect this place, Vincent. Like, almost like, the riffraff came in. So it's just like, like, it's a means to an end. Like, he's not servicing these people, like, the criminals for, I don't know what his grander purpose is beyond this. I guess this is all stuff he's made that maybe just didn't, I don't know if he's made this stuff in secret, all this tech stuff in secret, and no one knows that he did, or maybe he did. I was about to say, you'd assume there'd be some records behind it. I mean, obviously, Norman and Otto have history depending on the continuity, and maybe they've always had history. I know, like, whether it's Spectacular Spider-Man, whether it's Spider-Man PS4, but them being like colleagues and stuff like that, kind of like, I'm sure it's the same parallel as like the Reed and Doom parallel too, of like we're adversarial and you made it big time, but I didn't. I feel like I'm justified more by it. Like, I'm more gifted than you are. Why did you have all this success and that bitterness and that anger? Which maybe there's validity to it, because obviously Norman is a complete another douchebag, and in most versions we haven't seen the douchebaggery here yet, but doesn't mean he wasn't one. Maybe he did some terrible stuff to put himself on top. I mean, you don't get at the top and stay at the top by always playing nice, and sometimes that becomes, that nicety kind of disappears more and more just to stay at the top. But who knows? Like I said, we don't fully know if this version of Norman went down that route already and, is full speed ahead towards becoming the Green Goblin, or maybe he just doesn't in this continuity. We'll have to wait to see. But it's just, like I said, we just don't quite know what his other than trying to end up on top. I don't know why he's giving his tech to criminals. Like, I don't know if he's trying to build, like, he's probably just building the capital so that he could eventually start his own business. Because they do have history, Norman probably saw the logo and it probably seemed familiar to him. And maybe it's one of those things where it's like, it's been so long and Otto is sadly so, like, out of his forefront of his mind that he doesn't recognize it immediately despite everything. Because like Otto has just kind of disappeared maybe from the public eye type of thing. And so Norman hasn't recognized it yet despite their history, because he just doesn't, like, I'm sure that logo does have significance, because it does kind of, I don't know if it's meant to be like not unless it's supposed to be like two O's beside each other, because it kind of looked a little almost like a infinity logo, but I don't know. Either way, I'm going on this tangent, but my point was, like, maybe it'll eventually hit Norman, like, oh, that's Otto's, or, maybe, like I said, maybe it doesn't have any direct connection to Otto, yet, or maybe it never did. I think it's going to be interesting when him and Otto do meet, because it makes me wonder, will he not even remember Otto, and that's probably going to piss him off even more, His entire life has been consumed by proving himself to be the best about a lot of people, but specifically Norman, and for Norman not to know him could really set him off. Actually, I also meant to bring this up last episode because I saw his name in the credits. Otto is voiced by Hugh Dancy. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. The thing I probably best know Hugh Dancy from, because I know more recently he's in the OG Law and Order when it came back. But the thing I best know him for is Hannibal. I'm blanking on his character's name, but that's also interesting too, because like two other alumni from that show were part of like the MCU. That being Mads Mikkelsen, obviously he was Caecilius in Doctor Strange, and then you have Lawrence Fishburne, who was it Bill Foster? I always forget the character's name. I believe so, from Ant-Man and the Wasp. He's popped up obviously more in the more recently in the What If episodes, whether it's like season 2 and 3. But yeah, nevertheless, it's just kind of interesting when you think about stuff like that. But putting all that aside, we have the Peter side of things, which still ties into the Otto side of things, but Peter, and we're picking up where, Harry knows your secret identity now, and now it turns out Harry is kind of playing the Ned role in this series, as Harry puts it, your dude in the desk, and Norman's like, well, that's not how I put it, but sure, whatever. And I think maybe this is significant too, where it's just like, yeah, my son is 15, 16. He's like, 16. Because Harry and Norman, like I said, depending on the version, can have a very complicated relationship. I don't know if they're like that in this. I brought it up last episode. I feel like there could be a jealousy thing there, where it's like, Harry feels like Peter's kind of the son Norman wanted, where it just feels like, I'm not living up to what my dad wants, even though this is kind of my legacy. It's kind of more Peter's legacy than it is mine. Like, I'm wondering, like, I brought that up last episode, wonder if that'd be kind of a contentious element to their relationship. Harry feeling like he needs to prove himself, because like I kept referencing like Spectacular Spider-Man, that was kind of part of Harry's route of eventually going down the Green Goblin route, and I don't know if that always plays into his story and why he might go down that route. Obviously, the movies did it a little differently. I think it was just his own thing in the Amazing Spider-Man movies, and obviously it was for revenge in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. Once again, just a little thing of like, 15, 16. You could, be like, that's a little weird. But also I was like, well, yeah, parents kind of forget their kids' age sometimes. Like my dad sometimes will like be like, are you this? I was like, how old are you now? And it's like, yeah, because I would be like, maybe he'll guess and he'll be like a year or two off. So I'm not, it's not necessarily an indictment. It's just kind of like, that's interesting. But, it could just also be like a Harry being like, I'm 16, correction type of thing. So, you could, I think, interpret that and view that multiple ways. Either way, even though Harry and Pete haven't really become friends, we are seeing that this episode is them becoming friends. Obviously, it's going to be interesting considering your friend is kind of like a social media kind of influencer, and he's very popular online. And it's like, that's going to be... Peter never worried about that, and I thought it was kind of interesting where he was like, like this guy's pretty... He's like, well, he's an Osborn, so I trust him to keep his secret because Norman trusts him, so obviously I trust him even though I don't really know him that well. But yeah, obviously getting dropped off by Harry at school. I even love that one of the teachers was like, oh my God, that's him there. I'm going to wave. And it's like, what are you doing? Now you're like, I'm going to wave at this kid who's associated with Harry Osborn, not Harry Osborn himself. I was like, that's hilarious. That a teacher's fanning out like that. It's like, why is that? It's like, well, he's big time influencer, his dad being who he is. And I thought it was interesting where Nico brings up like, hey, like the fact is that you're hanging out with juniors and seniors and billionaires. She's like, I just want to make sure that you make time for, and she pauses and she says, you. And I was like, wait, is that? And then later parts of the episode kind of show like, yeah, she was talking about herself. Because outside of Pete, we haven't really seen Nico interact with anyone. So like Pete might be the first friend Nico's had in a long time, maybe. Or maybe ever, who knows? And it's like, well, obviously, like she's Pete's really good friend. Like, he's gotten associated with other people, sure. Like Pearl is like, well, they have history. Then there's like, but him and Lonnie become good friends. So it just for her, it feels like her might be her only friend, who basically her best friend is kind of being taken away from her a little bit, and she's kind of feeling a little lonely. And Pete tries. I don't know if he fully reads that, but he invites her to like a movie later on because he's trying to get her tickets and stuff. I do love the whole conversation about like, hey, she was like, this whole situation with like after the events of Civil War, it's kind of crazy. She's like, I don't know are the Avengers going to be okay? And I think that's so interesting, getting like a ground level perspective of it, because it's the movies, you don't have enough time to talk about that stuff. But it is kind of interesting getting like the general public. I mean, I feel like they vaguely touched on it like a tiny bit in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. That was back when Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was like, it was fully tied to the MCU, like the last 2 or so seasons. It kind of goes its own route, but still. So I think there was like a little bit that they referenced the events of Civil War, if I remember correctly. So But yeah, I love that her being like, oh, not really. Oh, I don't think Tony was right, but she's like, I don't really think Captain America's right either. I also love that Harry turns out to be a big Cap fan too, because I just love that like I don't know why I'm so stupid that I didn't even realize, like, well, the suit is blue on the sides, because I'm like, that's why I'm like, is that supposed to be the Future Foundation suit, or is it just supposed to be like, no, it's his base suit, it's just not red, it's just white. And he's like, oh yeah, I want it to be a little more red, white. He's like, red and blue, like Captain America. And you know, him and Harry hit it off as Cap fans, and it's like, oh yeah, like he's like, oh, you have to break a few lines, you know, but he's helping out his best friend. Who wouldn't? You broke a few laws. You had to do it to help your best friend. Like, well, there's no big deal on that front, right? And I also love, he's like, yeah, I also heard, like, there's a theory that he's not Steve Rogers, that Steve Rogers died 4 years ago, which would have been around the time of Avengers. So it's like, I guess after the attack in New York, he was killed. But it's like, it's a clone, which there's layers to that. Because I'm sure comics have been around for a very long time. So I'm sure Cap has had a clone situation happen to him. My thought of, oh, clones and comics, I'm like, well, I think of like, I don't know if that's supposed to be a wink and nod to like, well, obviously there's a pretty infamous, you know, clone saga arc for Spider-Man. So I don't know if there's like a little touch on that, but it also plays into, I think it's kind of interesting, like, right, the theories that kind of run rampant in the MCU that you don't really get to hear about. Like, I mean, see, like in universe rumors, like I think it was Falcon and the Winter Soldier, like after, you know, Steve retired and it was up to, you know, Sam to become Cap. The whole rumor was, wait, where's Steve at? And the rumors, I believe at the time, were like, oh yeah, like he's on the moon or something like that, like a mission on the moon. That was because we still don't know where. I mean, not unless they tackle this in like Cap 4 Brave New World. I don't think they would, but you know, I haven't seen the movie yet, so I could be mistaken. But the whole Steve of it all, I think, is interesting. Just once again, just that ground level thing that makes you wonder, like, to hear what people in the like in the Marvel universe, like just regular people, how they view things, and what are these theories that are probably running rampant online and stuff like that. So it's just funny stuff like that. You have Mila busting her crew out of prison. Obviously, once again, going down the. I love this. Like, oh, you look like a rhino. She's like, no, more like a unicorn. And it's what she says later on when she busts people out, which I think is so fascinating. Because it wasn't, someone else pointed this out last. I was listening to someone else talk about it, and I was like, they didn't directly say anything, but putting it together, and someone references the Rhino. I was like, Rhino? I was like, oh yeah, the guy I'm thinking might be Hammerhead. I was like, right, Russian. It should have been so clear to me that he was Rhino, but they even kind of wink and nod to it in that conversation. I was like, of course, okay. Her being a unicorn and being Rhino. I wonder, are the other two like some like animal-based criminals as well? Yes, I know unicorns are mythical beasts, but you get what I'm trying to say. But yeah, they bust out, and it's interesting because Mila's the one that wants to cause havoc, which is so interesting because she seemed so calm and collected for the most part last episode. So for her to be so quick to be like, oh, I'm gonna wreak havoc, makes me wonder, is it because, like, I was wondering, is the helmet doing something to her? But you know, the whole adage of, you know, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Like when you're feeling that power, maybe you've never felt powerful in your life. It's, you know, this is on a whole other level. She lost herself to it, so she started causing much chaos. It's like, yeah, the whole point was to break everyone out and get away, but she decided she wanted to stay behind. The other two were like, yo, Mikael, we should leave. But he was like, no. Milos came back for us. We got to stick around. It's like, yes, but we got locked up because she bailed on us. She only came to save us out of like alleviating a guilty conscience. But so see you around. Hopefully you don't get locked up. But he stuck around for her. But like she didn't want to listen when he was like, yo, let's get out of here. Understandably so, because it's like, no, I'm saying from like his part, of like, yo, let's get out of here before we get arrested again. You've had your fun. But for her, it's just like she got consumed by that power. Started attacking innocent people just to keep Pete from you know, it's like, oh, like your weakness is you care about people and stuff. Even went and almost, I ended up attacking Mikhail because she knew Spider-Man would get in the way. And even he's like, whoa, you would do that? Like, no, I stayed behind because I was like, yo, I'm riding and dying with you because, like, you know, I'm trying to be your ride or die because it's like, yo, like, the others didn't believe in you, but you came to save us, so of course I had your back. But then, and he's like, oh, yeah, I believed that you would. Like, you know, so, and for you to kind of, like, use me as like bait like that is super effed up. I mean, he's like, if it wasn't for Spider-Man, I could be dead right now. And she's like, get over it. I knew he'd save your life. So he takes the helmet off of her. Ultimately, Peter like webs her after taking the helmet from her, so she's done. Which even Pete's like, yeah, thanks, but he's like, don't thank me. We're even now, but the next time I will wipe you from existence. So it's like, yeah, so you're good for now. I was about to say like, oh, that's going to be interesting. But it's like, no. We're good for now, but I'm about to get locked up again because of you. That's also on Milos, but at the end of the day, not Milos. I think I kept calling her Milos. Sorry, I had to correct myself because I got it stuck in my head because the character's name is Milos in the comics, and her name is different. And it's Mila. So sorry about that. I just finally caught myself. I think I've been calling her Milos the entire time. But either way, so yeah, that was interesting. It's going. I'm curious to see how that plays out. Once again, the other two did get away, but I wonder what happens now that he's like back in prison. It's like, well, it's kind of not on Peter. It's not really on Spider-Man, but it kind of is because he's the one that stopped you from getting away. It's like, well, also if it wasn't for Mila kind of being so, you know, like power hungry and just kind of power tripping, you know, you would have gotten away. So either way, I thought it was interesting. Obviously, I was worried Peter was going to miss the whole thing with Nico, and then once he almost did, but it's like, once again, it's that juggling act of like, right, being school, trying to work at Oscorp as an intern, plus now like being Spider-Man like right after school and stuff too, and trying to balance in your friendships. But luckily he showed up in time, which even she was like, oh, I was worried that you were gonna bail on me again. He was like, yeah, you're well, unlucky for you, you're stuck with me. But he ended up inviting Harry, thinking like, oh, it wouldn't be that big of a deal because he's bonded with Harry because he thought, because Harry, like, yes, Harry comes from like a very privileged situation, but it's still the thing of like, yeah, but none of my friendships are real. It's just people mainly being like, how are you rich? He's like, because I was born rich. You know, how do I get rich? And he was like, I don't know. I was born rich. It doesn't work that way. So he does, you know, all the friendships, you know, all his regular friends and everything that he went to regular school with are still at school, and any other friends he has, he also has to worry about, well, whether they just want me for clout. So it's like, he doesn't really have any relationships. He doesn't really interact with people because he's not in a public school. He's homeschooled. So it's like, yeah, you know, being rich doesn't always, you know, you do have your own issues and problems, which some people are like, oh, that's a problem I love to have. But it's just on the social level. It's just kind of like, right, it's the grass is always greener type of situation. You're going to miss out on stuff. So I think Pete, you know, he had his misconceptions about Harry just because it's like, oh, you're the son of Norman Osborn, plus you're super popular on social media. But it's like, yeah, you have your own things that you have to deal with, that like things aren't like all sunshine and roses when it comes to your personal life, you know. And Pete's doing everything he can to hold on to his, which obviously Nico just feels it even more by the end, where it's just like, oh, like Pete's being pulled more and more away from me. And it was interesting too when she touched her necklace and she's like, it's gonna be okay. So I'm wondering what that's about. I was wondering, I was like, is that going to be something tied to her powers? Because it's been, obviously I haven't seen Runaways in years. I remember her powers were connected to the staff, but I don't know if that's traditionally how it works for her in the comics. I don't fully remember how Nico's powers work, because I think it's just something in her. I don't think it's fully associated with the staff. I think it's one of those things of, oh, she has the staff at first because it helps maybe like focus her power, but it doesn't necessarily come from the staff, it comes from her. I think that still is how it works, but like, once again, that's how it worked in the show, I think. Once again, I could be misremembering. I don't know how her situation works in the comics or exactly the same. And I was wondering if that amulet that she was wearing, I mean, it could correlate and connect to like her biological parents or something. I mean, maybe it kind of like, yeah, she's kind of lonely in this world, and being friends with Pete came at the right time in her life. I don't know. It's just, you know, it's just a sad concern of like, right, you feel the friend you have slipping away. So that's a very interesting development. On the other side of things, we had the whole situation with Lonnie, as Lonnie, just like Pete, is stretched thin, trying to balance, football, which obviously means the world to him, and his coach being like, yo, like you can't miss, practice. It's like you need to be out there in the field. Don't allow any like scouts. Don't give them a chance to overlook someone like you. This is a great opportunity. You don't want to miss it. He's like, yeah, I got to deal with some family stuff. And it's like, I get it, but this football's got to be your, and once again, I keep saying like football is going to be kind of his way to get out, specifically with his family, of being able to take care of them and put them in a better place. But yeah, like despite everything Donovan calls, and like, right, he's where it's interesting because Pete, luckily this time, was able to meet his obligations when it came to Nico, but that won't always be the case. But sadly, Lonnie wasn't able to. He had to bail. So that's going to be interesting to see what that does. And I think that is going to be very isolating, considering, like, right, you got this big secret. Once again, the parallels. You've got this big secret that you're doing some shady stuff. At least in Pete's case, it's like, oh, I'm doing the hero thing. But in Lonnie's case, it's like, oh, I'm doing some not so great stuff. But to be fair, it's for my family's sake, because I did it for my brother and to make sure my family's safe and secure. And eventually that is going to pile on you when you feel like everything else fall into the wayside. Like, it's going to play into leading to Donovan having his fingers in, like, his having a tighter and tighter grip on you, because you're going to have less and less. Like, it's probably going to pull you further from your family, going to pull you further from Pearl. Like, everyone on the team respects him because it's like, yo, it's a quarterback. Yeah, do you remember what a football is and stuff? Because we haven't seen you. And now the more he bails on those obligations, the more he's losing himself as Lonnie, the more he's going to become Tombstone. So I'm sure that's going to be the thing, and it's probably going to end up happening, and it's going to isolate Lonnie and push him further down the dark route. It could be the direction that goes. It feels like we're seeing like the dominoes of that, but we'll have to wait to see. But other than that, yeah, he got called up by Donovan because they're duking it out with the Scorpions, and lo and behold, Mac shows up himself and being like, oh, like he's not backing down from Donovan, and it turns into a full-blown gang fight there. Mac was going for the kill, drew a knife and everything, was going to go for Donovan, but Lonnie had his back. Problem is, once again, Carmilla probably already told Mac about him. So it's like, at least Carmilla had an idea. Whether she told Mac, really, who knows? But at the end of the day, Mac now knows your face. If it wasn't already an issue before, it's even more so now, because he's personally pissed at you because you got in the way of him and Donovan. So it's like, he's like, I'm not forgetting that anytime soon. But then, like, you have this congratulatory, like, brotherhood being like, yo, you're one of us now officially. I didn't think you had it in you, but you do. And then Donovan's the one that called him Tombstone, and Lonnie's like, oh, I like that. It's that camaraderie that was all about the football team. And now it's like, oh, all that feeling of family and we're a unit is now being transferred over to the 110. Because it is a thing of like, it's a different feeling, a different thrill, of, hey, doing stuff on a football field, but being like, nah, like I was there, like I saved his life. Like it fills you with a certain like energy where you're just like, oh, that was different. I like that feeling, like, having this nickname and being kind of respected. It's like, oh, don't call me superstar anymore. I'm like, ooh, I'm Tombstone. I like that, So that's some very interesting developments on that front too. So it's going to be interesting to see where the next episode takes us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.